Thank you, Keith, and always beware when somebody you know is the one who introduces you. Welcome to the last session of the day at the Decatur Book Festival. I'm so excited to speak with these two authors today who you are going to be very excited to buy their books for you, your friends, your cousins, your book group, and it's getting cold, so it's like the perfect time to use these books to snuggle up in the winter. I'm going to introduce to you Lo Patrick. Lo is a former novelist,
I hope
you're
not.
a former attorney.
Yes.
And current novelist. We forgive you for the former. Who grew up outside of Atlanta and went to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. She stayed in LA where she was a concert promoter, model booker, and musician. She eventually left LA to attend law school at the University of Miami, where she graduated magna cum laude and began writing. She is now in Georgia with her husband and 2 children, and The Floating Girls is her debut novel. Welcome, Lo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I also have the pleasure of introducing you to Carolyn Newton Curry. She's an award-winning author, historian, and founder of the nonprofit Women Alone Together. She's also the author of Suffer and Grow Strong, The Life of Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas, 1834 to 1907, which won the Georgia Author of the Year Award and was listed as one of the books all Georgians should read. And Sudden Death is her first work of fiction. So welcome, Carolyn. Now, don't worry that there's not a Q&A. Keith mentioned you can ask your questions in the signing line, but I have enough questions for all of us, and I'm gonna start with hopefully an easy one. So I'd love to hear, Lo, if you could tell me what inspired you to write your book.
This is such an odd question for me because I always act like a deer in headlights when somebody asks me that. I don't know. I just sat down and started writing, which is what I do, and I had really no direction, no plot mapped out, really no idea what I was going to write, but I could hear the narrator's voice, and so I more or less let her tell me the story, which might make me sound schizophrenic, but I knew she wasn't real, but I was writing about her. And I just went with it. It went through many iterations, so that just tends to be how I do it. So the inspiration was her. Once she came into my head and I could hear her and I could see her, it took on a life of its own.
Excellent. Well, you probably are aware that in our audience we have writers and readers, so nothing you say will seem weird to your friends here.
Give me some time, but yes.
And Carolyn, you have a different way you came to your story. Tell me what inspired you to write yours.
Oh, do we have time? My life created this book. This book sort of wrote itself. My husband went to Georgia Tech and played football on a scholarship, and then went into the NFL for 10 years. Then was a college coach for 27 years and worked for ESPN for 11 years. So my life has been spent in the world of football. And about 20 years ago, he was with ESPN in Hawaii, and that was tough duty. And I felt like I had to go with him. And I did, but I had leisure time, and that was rare for me. So I picked up a couple of yellow legal pads and started writing a novel. And it was fun, and I just wrote away. And somehow the inspiration came up to write a murder mystery set in the world of football. And I have no idea where that came from, but it was fun. I like Agatha Christie, and I love watching those mysteries on television. And so it was fun. And then when I came home, I put it on the shelf in our office and didn't pick it up until the beginning of COVID. And then when I decided to copy those 2 legal pads and started typing away, I just kept typing for about 7 months. And I just wrote this story. It just came to me. I didn't outline it. I didn't do Post-it notes or anything. It came from my life experience, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it. So that's how this novel happened.
Well, thanks for sharing. And I was thinking, for a historian, you're used to researching what you don't know. And for this, you actually were able to pull from your life?
Yes. I have so many people saying, Carolyn, you're a historian. Why in the world did you write this book? And in history, and John Pruitt was here a while ago, and I enjoyed his presentation so much. He talked about being a journalist, and you have to get the facts, and you have to write the facts and present only the facts. And I was tied to that for so many years. But then when you write fiction, yes, you have to know the period you're talking about, and I knew this period from my life, and I was freed to just take a leap and create characters, create dialogue, and all of that, and it was great fun. And I love to talk about Geraldine Brooks. I love her writing. She was a journalist too, and she said that as a journalist, she felt like because of all my research, I knew more than I could write. I was sort of held up. You go to the edge of the cliff, but you can't jump. But when you write fiction, you can go to the edge of the cliff and then just leap off, and you can let your imagination take off. So that's what I did in this book.
That's excellent. And that does lead me to my next question. Many of us are avid readers, and here I love Southern fiction. I feel like particularly Southern women in fiction are almost like a mythical creature. And I'd love for each of you to tell me about your main characters, these strong characters. So Lo, tell me about your character.
Well, my narrator is a 12-year-old girl, and she's certainly strong because she has to be. Her circumstances are far less than desirable. They live in a very destitute area of southern Georgia on the coast. And she just kind of has to put up with her circumstance, which is very dysfunctional family, dysfunctional parents, secretive, living kind of away, isolated. And so her strength is just this resilience, just keep on keeping on in spite of really less than ideal family life, which when you're 12 years old, that's everything. So, her kind of trying to break away from her family while she still has close relationships with her brothers and tries to love her parents as we do at that age. It's kind of before we create real opinions of our parents. So she's, she's not based on anyone, but I feel like I knew her. I can remember driving around Richmond Hill, which is an area near Savannah. It's really developed now, but it didn't used to be, and we used to go down there. And I can remember driving around some roads down there and seeing these houses way, way off the road and just sort of wondering what life was like, or seeing a kid standing, on the porch or something. And I just got a little tickle to imagine what life was like. And so that's where Kay came from. And she's definitely a strong character because I certainly didn't grow up that way. And she gets through it. And sometimes that's enough. Getting through it is sometimes all that can be asked, especially of a child. So.
And while you have the mic, can you just give us a brief synopsis without spoiling any good parts of the story? Tell us what your story is about.
Oh my God, this is another thing I'm not good at. It's a coming of age story about Kay. Kay discovers a little boy her age living in a house further back into the marsh. He doesn't go to school, and they're kind of cagey, Andy and his father. And her, I'll use the word obsession, but her fascination with him sort of triggers a whole mess of unraveling, a family situation that's not very well put together in the first place. And I won't go into the next.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. There's a lot of things that come out as the story goes on, but I don't want to give any of them away.
Yes, she discovers a boy and a mystery unfolds.
You got it. I'll bring you with me everywhere I go. But I urge people who are reading it to understand that it is not a typical mystery. It's not a suspense novel. Mm-hmm. It's a work of literary fiction with some mystery elements. So I think sometimes it's different than what people are expecting, which, what isn't. But so it's not like a full throttle mystery. I don't know. You read it. Maybe you would disagree, but
No, I like that.
Okay.
I like what you said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caroline, you have a strong central character. I'd love for you to talk about her and also give us an idea of the arc of the story.
Well, strong women are a favorite topic of mine. My book that you referred to of my Civil War woman, Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas, the name of that book is Suffer and Grow Strong. She was a woman who lost everything during the Civil War and had 4 children die. And she had to figure out what she was going to do with the rest of her life. And she came to Atlanta and became a leader in the suffrage movement. So, that's the strong woman. My lead character, my female lead character in this book, is a young woman who grew up in Atlanta, and she wanted to go a long way away to school, and she wanted to change the world. And she was very gung-ho about women and women's rights, and she convinced her father that she should go to UCLA. Sort of made me think of you. And she went to UCLA, and that's where she met this young man, Duke, who was from Hawaii. And she wanted to go to law school, and she was very passionate about that and determined she was going to get her way. That was one of her character traits. She was very persuasive and always trying to get her way and fight for her way and try to tell everybody else what to do. Some of my friends have laughingly said they see a lot of me in her, and I say, am I that way? And there's a little bit of that in me. But she went to law school. She never had children. She did have, in the end, without telling you the story, she does find a way to help women, and she does find a way to survive, which is really central to my book, to reinvent her life after horrific loss.
Well, that makes me think about the horrific loss. So I'll start with you again, Caroline, because the title of your book is Sudden Death. And it has 2 meanings in your book. So I'd love for you to tell us about death on the football field and then death that's impending.
Well, those of you here who are football fans know that in college football, a game cannot end in a tie. But that rule did not come into effect until 1996. That was the first year that a game could no longer end in a tie. And you get the ball on the 25-yard line, and you can score a touchdown and an extra point, and then the other team will get the ball, and they have the chance to go for a touchdown extra point. Now, if they go for 2 points and don't make it, that's the end of the game, and it's called sudden death. And this book opens with a game that ends in one of those sudden death situations, but it's a double meaning. Well, obviously, if someone is shot on the field and dies, that is sudden death too, and it's horrific. But it was just, like I say, an Agatha Christie thing, and you have to have a dead body in the first chapter. And I just finished reading, and then there were none. Agatha Christie had 10 dead bodies in that book. So, this is fiction, and I always say to people, this is fiction, don't forget, and I'm creating a fictional story. And for the first 10 events that I had of this book, I said, and I hope this never happens. And of course, security is so much better at stadiums now since 9/11 than it was before. But only a few weeks ago, a youth league football coach in Texas was shot on the football field by the opposing coach and died. So when we say the emotions of football, it's a horrific thing, but it has happened, and we hope it never happens again. But that was the premise. My husband had death threats at 3 different schools, and I had a death threat at one. And you begin to think, if someone were to follow through on one of those death threats, what would happen? And that was sort of the premise for this book.
Thank you. I like that because in your book, sort of we feel death is coming, even the title alone, we're worried about it. Lo, in yours, the death that influences your story is actually in the past. Tell us how death influences your story.
Well, I think maybe one in the more profound ways is that these people are living on such the outside of society, and they're kind of like forgotten people, and that death in certain areas is not really all that important. We see things now like a celebrity funeral, and there's 4,000 people there, and a lot of people pass on and no one even really knows. And that is what is kind of, I try to tackle here, is that it was largely forgotten about and largely unsolved, and kind of just something that happened that a few people knew about. And when it's rediscovered, it's haunting because it's in the mix of something else that's going on as well, with another person who's living sort of on the edge of society in a place where people really don't care about each other or don't have the capacity to engage the way that we do, in our lives here. So death is a very final, obviously, but not if it's comes back around. So I guess that would be what I would say, is that it's something that, although the person who died is gone and the family seems to have moved on, it'll show its ugly face again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you.
If that made any sense. I've never had a death threat, so I'm not, that I know of. So, that I know of. We're still waiting, but.
Well, death is very present in much of fiction. And I'll stay with you, Lo, again for a follow-up question, because you had to step into the shoes of a very young protagonist. Was that easy or hard? Tell us about being that person.
I thought it was easy, so I don't know what that says about me, writing from the perspective of a 12-year-old girl. And a lot of people ask me, well, is that what you were like? I wasn't anything like Kay, my character. I'm not from the marsh. I'm not from that kind of family. Nothing. It's not a story about me at all. So, like I said, she had such a distinct voice and such a distinct way about her that it was like she was telling me the story. And when I would write, I would like make her faces and, say the little things that she was saying out loud, and think like how her body language would be dealing with her dad. And so, no, I didn't find it difficult, but I really had to like get into character, which is, I guess, something they usually talk about with acting, but I had to like be Kay while I was working on it. And, going in and out of that is sometimes like days where I wasn't really connecting, and then days where I could just go on and on for hours kind of in her world. So yeah, I didn't find it that difficult. I'm not writing anything from a child's perspective right now. So we'll see if I'm able to do it again. I don't know.
No, it was wonderful. And for many of us reading, we can also remember what it feels like to be that age, and when the world felt like infinite and also like constricting. So that's great. We're going to do a quick pause. Who in here likes football? Okay. Just want to make sure before I ask my next question.
Okay. Where did you meet your husband?
I met my husband at Stanford University on the football field.
See, she has a connection to football too.
Yes. I have a big love for football. And my thought was, when I was reading your book, which is, so football is very beloved to many of us. So either I'll just call it Saturday football or Sunday football. Mm-hmm. So some people probably recording games right now that they're missing, or they're going to see tonight, and they may have plans for tomorrow. But we don't often see football in literary fiction. We'll see biographies and memoirs, but not in fiction. So were you excited to tell a football story, or did you hesitate because of your personal connection?
Well, I want to say that I love football too. Our family loves football. We've spent our entire life. My husband and I sat down and figured out the other day that I've gone to over 700 football games in my life. I've gone to all of his college games, his high school games. We met in elementary school, believe it or not. So I was there for his Georgia Tech days, for his pro football days, all of his college coaching, and then I went to a lot of the ESPN games that he broadcast, and then he started the Georgia State program from scratch. And Bill hears from former players every week, and that is such a joy about this stage in our life. You love the players, you love the coaches, you love the game, the excitement. We were able to go to 3 Super Bowls and play in bowl games. I mean, a lot of wonderful things. Those are the good things, the happy things about football. But at the same time, there is stress, there is anxiety, there's now we have the worry about brain injury. It's a violent sport. We must always remember that it's a violent sport. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are death threats. And you have death threats to coaches, and it's unusual to have death threats to wives, but I have spoken to other wives that have had death threats too. So once that happens to you, you can't help but think about it. And I remember after, and as I say, this was taken very seriously at the University of Kentucky because we had a player that was murdered by somebody with a high-powered rifle hiding in bushes across the way. And he was sitting on his porch on his 21st birthday with some other players that lived in the house with him, and they all witnessed this. And it wasn't solved for a long time. And when I got my death threat, they had not solved that yet. So that's the reason the FBI was brought in and it was taken so seriously. So I always tell my audiences, yes, we love football. There's so many wonderful things about it, but there are things that are dark. There are things that are not so good about football. And when you begin to write a story like this, some of those things just keep creeping up. And so this book ended up being very cathartic for me because I got a lot of this stuff out that had lived in me for all these years. But I want people to know that, yes, there's some good things about football, but this is just this is what goes on behind the scenes. And I will tell you this, social media has made it worse. And if you can imagine what the coaches and their children are reading on social media. And I had a University of Virginia player tell me not too long ago that if he makes a bad play in a game, people will start talking about him on social media and making threats and all of that. So it's a very scary thing that we want to be aware of.
Well, hopefully readers who like football, either from the stands or from the comfort of your home, will think about football in a new way after reading your story, because it is very different once you've stood on the sidelines, you've been in the locker room. There are lots of things, like you've mentioned, that are struggles and also camaraderie. There's positive things. So I think it's great to read a story that...
Well, everything in life, we should look at both sides, shouldn't we?
Yes.
The good and the bad. And then if we know about the bad, what can we do to make it better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Mm-hmm. Lo, I'd love to know, what do you want readers to take away from your story?
Oh, these are zingers. I don't know why I don't have better answers for these. I think in many respects it's a very sad story. So I want people to take away the atmosphere of it, because I'm really just totally intrigued with the natural world down on the coast. I love it, and it really speaks to me. So I want people to take away from the atmosphere, the unique quality of the atmosphere that we have here in the South. I think sometimes we are complaining about the humidity, but there's all sorts of things that you really don't find anywhere else in the world here. And I think I want the reader to feel that. I want the reader to feel the sadness and kind of hopelessness from a child's perspective, and also this determination as well. And I want them to, I don't know, I'll leave it there without giving, I don't want to give anything away, I guess, so I'll stop there.
They'll ask a question in the signing line.
We'll see. I just say something that might be...
Okay, but determination is a good word.
Determination and perseverance in the face of adversity, which sounds like a Hallmark card, but this is a different version of it, because totally different life. And people are facing adversity all the time, and we don't realize that. We don't recognize people's struggles, because Kay talks at one point about being like a weed growing up in a crack of a sidewalk. And we look at like, beautiful flowers planted in front of buildings and all these things. And then there's like the flower at the gas station. And Kay considers herself a flower at the gas station. And we don't know what everyone's going through, or I don't know, an exercise in pity maybe. So, but she gets through. She does. So
Great.
Makes me think of Where the Crawdads Sing.
well, that's what I have not read that book, so that's what everybody was comparing it to, but I can't say one way or another because I haven't read it and haven't seen the movie either. So
Well, she had a fascination with nature and all of that. Delia Owens,
yeah,
the writer.
Kay is not as fascinated with nature, but she's got her mind on a boy living back in it. Yeah,
Well,
so.
that ended up in
Oh, okay.
Crawdads too.
Okay, well, there you go. There you go.
Carolyn, what do you want readers to take away from this story?
You mentioned the foundation that I've been doing
Yes.
for 20 years, Women Alone Together. I started that, the idea came to me when I was at the University of Kentucky because I had a lot of women auditing my class that were older, and I learned that they were recent widows or they had been divorced after a very long marriage, and they wanted to do something meaningful with their lives, and they wanted to meet other women and all of that, and they wanted to recover. And part of their recovery was to do meaningful things, to meet other women, and to come together. And so I started doing that at the University of Kentucky and then continued it down here and went to Agnes Scott to join with the Alumni Association there. But it's all about recovery from horrific loss. And my heroine in this book, of course, suffers horrific loss. And there's another woman, there's a subplot in the book about spouse abuse. And she is recovering from horrific loss also. And the book starts on a dark note, but I wanted it to end on a more optimistic, hopeful note, a note of recovery. And both of these women are able to work through the horrific things that have happened in their lives and begin to look outward and not so much inward. And in the end of the book, I don't want to tell you too much, but they're able to move on with their life. And one of the best things that happened to me, a very dear friend called me from Baltimore right after her husband died, and she said, "I just finished reading your book and I cried." I love the ending because it helped me feel that I had done the right thing about when Tom died. So that maybe justified the whole thing. So I like that about the book. And I think it's hard to figure out how to end any book. But a book like this, it was very important that I got the ending right.
And if anyone's curious about your organization, the website is womenalonetogether.org.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I think there's probably some people curious about that. You both are talking about some serious topics and grief and reaction and sort of the way the world can be very difficult. And over the years we recently had in the pandemic, it was tough. Lo, tell me first, how did the pandemic impact you or your writing?
Well, I have small children. I mean, they're not as small as they used to be, just like none of us are as small as we used to be, but as they were at the beginning of the pandemic. So they were suddenly home, and I was in a position of like homeschooling, where I was used to writing during the day. It actually made me appreciate my children more because they were so much fun, and also made me appreciate the time that I get to work more. Because it was precious commodity then, because I really was with them all day, every day, and I write full time. That's what I do. So I had a newfound appreciation for the time that I get to shut the door to my office and actually work. And I think it's helped me. I don't waste as much time when I'm working now. And I also have smaller windows of focus. Like I realize that if I've had a really strong hour, that might be it for the day. Whereas before I used to just kind of, for hours and hours and hours because I could. So it kind of reeled me in and got me a little bit more focused. And, in a way, all the horrible things that were going on and all of the fear and it was kind of a nice time to be a family. It definitely put the brakes on all of the busyness and settled us back in. So I've chosen now, a couple of years later, to look at most of that as it was a good thing for our family. And hopefully, I know a lot of people suffered far more than we did, so I'm sure they don't look at it that way. But that's what I've chosen to do now. And I think it helped my writing. Yeah. Spend more time at home, and you got more time to write.
Excellent. And somebody found 2 full legal pads during the pandemic. So what was that like for you?
Well, I was actually going to clean out a closet when COVID started. We still haven't cleaned out the closet, but I did find the 2 yellow legal pads and discover this book that I had started writing so many years ago. But I'm a little bit older than you are, just a little. I don't have children at home anymore. But I found that I run this nonprofit foundation. I go all the time in my real life, so to speak. And suddenly, here we were in COVID at home, and I had time. It's such a precious commodity. And I don't think I would have ever written this book or finished this book if it had not been for COVID. And I've heard other writers say this. I've listened to the 2 previous panels today, and everybody seems to be asking about COVID. And I've heard several writers say, I feel guilty a little bit about saying this, but that slowing down and having to cancel things, and you don't have to go all the time, and that gift of time and of just sitting down and thinking and writing was really wonderful. And I really don't think, I call this my COVID novel. I don't know that I would have written this. I don't even know if I would have written a novel, because I'm a historian. I'm not a novelist. But this came out of COVID, and it was sort of a gift from COVID, you might say. And I've very often said it was a godsend, because to have something that was occupying my mind every day, and to go in, because I didn't have sweet children around to school and be fascinated by, it was really a gift. And I know I would write, and then I would take it in for my husband to read, and we would have a good laugh or 2. And I know I took him the first chapter to proofread, and he read it, and he said, "You killed me in the first chapter." And I said, "This is fiction. No. This is Agatha Christie." And I said, "Anyway, this man is tall, dark, and handsome, and really smart. He couldn't possibly be you." So we had some laughs at the same time. Because I did try to create my coach very different from my husband. And he was from Hawaii, and he was brown skin, tall, good-looking guy, but his coaching philosophy was very much like my husband's. And Duke and Kendall meet at UCLA.
I'd love for you to add something to that, because we know you're a historian. You're writing a book that's fiction, but did you have to do any research for this book?
Well, I knew this life so well. It's my life. I have lived all of this. It's just like when I heard John Pruitt in the previous session. He lived that life as a journalist. He knew that world. I know this world so well, and it's a world that I don't think everybody else knows. And but I will say this as a historian. When you write fiction, you have to get your times correct. And if you bring up any historical event, you've got to make sure it's accurate, because there's an incident where Bobby Kennedy's assassination plays into this book. What was the date? Where was it? Who was there? That's historical research. You've got to get that right, and if you don't, your readers will call you out on it. What they were wearing, how they were talking. And so you do have to be careful about all of that. But writing fiction and nonfiction is very different. And I sort of wrote the novel, and then I had editors say, you've written it like a historian. So I sort of took a course on creative writing after I had written the novel. I had the story, but I had to learn how to do dialogue and how to flesh out the characters and all of that. And Ann Height, I was at her session. Some of you may have heard her earlier. She was a wonderful reader. She read my book, and we would talk on the telephone about every 2 weeks, and she'd say, "Tell me why that man is so mean, and or tell me more about that scene. I think your dialogue's a little stiff here." And I said, first you're a little offended, but then you say, "Oh, you've got a point there." And I'm writing like a historian. Historians don't use contractions, and you only say what you know you can say. But in fiction, it's very different. You can use your imagination, and sort of a light bulb sort of went off finally. And I said, "Oh, I can make things up." It was fun.
You can and you should.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Lo, did you have to do any research? You sort of know that area a little bit. What did you do to sort of bring the story more to life?
I really don't. I didn't do any research. Hopefully that's not apparent, but I've spent a lot of time down there. And so I just kind of let myself pretend, like maybe in a childlike way, just pretend that I lived there. And that was how, I watch my kids play and they're kind of make believe. And we grow up, we don't do that as much anymore, or at all, if we're healthy. But watching them, I tried to imagine what it would be like. And I think I did it successfully, because my husband and I, we drive around, we spend a lot of time in Savannah, and we'll say like, that looks like Kay's house. And my husband's always trying to find himself in my books too, which is not flattering. And so if I get mad, I'll be like, "You're like Kay's dad," because Kay's dad's just awful, and I'm working on something else where the husband is, gaining a lot of weight and all this stuff, and my husband's like, I'm like Tommy to you, he's joking around. So but it's nobody I know. That's the character's not based on anyone I know, and I worry sometimes people think that I based it on them, or so I haven't. I just made it all up. And so there's not a lot of research. I can't be. I thought maybe I could write historical fiction. No, too disorganized, I have to make it up, but the time thing is a killer, because you will get caught. Your editor will be like, "Well, why are they watching Goonies if it's, and they'll pull these things out that you're like, okay, fine, that doesn't make any sense." But I didn't do a lot of research. I did a lot of thinking, like a tea bag, like steeping in it down there, and just trying to pick it up, get the feels. So
You're in the right place, though, to write it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You were living in that area.
Yeah.
So we'll reiterate the disclaimer. None of the characters that appear in these books are based on anyone in reality. Any resemblance is purely coincidental.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And
sometimes they're amalgamate. You sort of combine traits and things you've seen in other people, and you incorporate them into one person. When people read the book, they'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Great. So based in reality, but brought to us in a fictional way. And I think for readers, we love that. We know there's truth in your story without it being fact. I do want to round out with just a couple of writing questions, because maybe we'll do another quick poll of the audience. Who is writing? Who's a writer? That guy in the green shirt definitely is. Okay, great. So what advice would you give to writers or about your process?
Go ahead.
Go. Keep writing. I wish more people wrote. This is a debut for me. This is my first published book. I was a lawyer. I did all sorts of other stuff, and I told my husband one day, "I want to be a writer." And he was like, "Oh God, here we go." But I really did, and if you love doing it, keep doing it. And don't worry about, there's a lot of rejection. It's very humbling. It's humbling even when good stuff's happening, it's still very humbling. You get your edits and everything, and you're like, "But that was the best part. They're ruining this sentence." They're not. They're wonderful. The editors are just, I hope you would agree. And my editor is just amazing. But keep doing it. Do it every single day. And even if you get 15 minutes of really good time. I used to time it out like I was working for 8 hours. I was only really working for 2. So it does, you know, the rest of the time I'm looking out the window. And so keep doing it. Do it every day. Give yourself a break. And if you keep knocking, somebody's going to let you in. And the more you write, the better writer you are. So in a way, it's good that it takes so long and that it can be so frustrating, because like anything, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I think back to some of the original stuff that I wrote and was submitting to agents and everything. And I'm like, you know, I'm not embarrassed by it, but I think I got a lot better. I mean, I needed some more time. And so keep at it, because I'd love to read what you're writing. I love to read. All writers love to read. Yeah. I'm a big reader. I want to read it all. So I wish more people wrote. There'd be more for me to read.
And I definitely agree with that. Everybody has to read. You got to read. And I encourage people to write if you want to write. But I never dreamed, and everybody that knows me would have never dreamed in 1,000 years that I would write a murder mystery. I mean, you know, I was just a strict historian writing about women in history. But this was sort of a lark for me, and it ended up being something I enjoyed. And I will say that when I'm writing, I might go in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then I just get lost in it. And I look up and it's 1 o'clock. I'm getting hungry. It's lunchtime. And I think anything you can do where you get lost in it and you're really enjoying it is definitely something you should be doing. And I think writing is that. And I also think that I've said this a lot, even if you're just writing it for your family, you don't have to try to get it published, but just write and leave a record of yourself and what you've done and what your family has done. And somebody was telling me today, they may be here in the audience, telling me about what they were writing about their family. And I think that's important. So you never know. And that's what I told her. You never know. It might get published. You may be really good.
Well, for readers out there, we know when a writer has fallen into the story and really loves writing it. And you said it was a lark, and then 7 months later, it was not a lark anymore. And so we can feel that when we read your story. So I'm very thankful that I had a chance to speak with both of you about these books. So I'm going to just reiterate: The Floating Girls by Lo Patrick and Sudden Death, Carolyn Newton Curry. I do encourage you to visit our bookseller, Eagle Eye, who's up front. Our authors will be available to take your questions in the signing line. And I mentioned book clubs. If you don't have a book club, I bet they'd appreciate it if you formed a book club so 20 of your friends can get these books. Well, there's so many more questions we could have asked about these stories. There's really rich discussions, and you may have fun. And they're books for everyone. So thank you so much for your time, and also thank you to the Decatur Book Festival for having us here today, and for you all for sticking around for the last session.
Yeah, the last session.
Yes.
We really appreciate it.